Before we get into the legal updates, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever been shunned as a child or seen it happen to someone young? Imagine being 13, 14, 15. Maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you asked too many questions. Suddenly, the people who should love you most, your parents, your brother, your brothers, your sisters, your lifelong friends, all turn their backs on you. And what if that child never goes back? In just a few short years, they'll leave home, and from then on, for the rest of their life, they'll be shunned. Shunned by everyone they grew up with. And here's something we don't talk about enough: the parents. Inside the organization, you're taught to believe that if your child doesn't come back, they're as good as dead. And I've been told that by elders. That negative energy takes over your whole household. The grief, the fear, and the brainwashing. Even after leaving, the damage lingers. That's why I call this lifelong psychological violence. Shunning doesn't just hurt the child, it destroys families from the inside out. Now let's look at what JW Org says. What do they say? The Court of Appeal unanimously overturns unconstitutional ruling in Norway. They present it as a huge win, saying the previous decision against them was unlawful, and they've now been reinstated with their registration and state funding. But it reminds me of what the scriptures say. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Proverbs 27 and verse 1. And 1 Kings 20 and verse 11 says, let not him who puts his armor boast like him who takes it off. In other words, don't claim victory too early. The Supreme Court case and maybe even the human rights court case is still ahead. But there's another side of the story. But here's the other side of the story. According to Avoid JW, the Court of Appeal did recognize that Jehovah's Witnesses practice shunning, and that it causes harm. So this ongoing practice of shunning, it's not just like it happened once and that's it. It's disciplinary. No, it's an ongoing thing. But the court decided that the practice does not meet the legal threshold of what Norway considers psychological violence. In other words, the court admitted that the harm is real, but it stopped short of calling it illegal. And here's something most people don't realize. Cases like this, they're about money. Norway, Jehovah's Witnesses spent close to $500,000 on lawyers, just for that one appeal alone. $500,000. And that's why so few ex-JWs ever take Watchtower to court. It's not because we don't have cases. It's because going up against $1 billion corporation costs a fortune. And Watchtower knows it. And they use this to their advantage. And that's why the Norway case is so important to all of us all over the world. If the courts there, or even the European Court of Human Rights, sets a precedent, it gives ordinary people a fighting chance. So let's just take a look at this. A few articles. This all comes from Avoid JW. Thanks to Miss Usato for publishing this. And she says this article is written regarding the long battle between Jehovah's Witnesses with Jan Nielsen. Comments on the matter. And the case centers on Jehovah's Witnesses' practice of social distancing, whereby members are counseled to limit contact with ex-members. Authorities have argued this constitutes negative social control and violates children's rights, thus disqualifying the organization from state funding under the Religious Communities Act. So all the receipts, everything's here. We'll pin this to this video. Oslo Court, it kind of gives what's been happening. August 26th, in the pivotal development, Norway Supreme Court has authorized an appeal from the Ministry of Children and Family against the Borgating Court of the Appeals landmarking rule. And this will be the fourth round between the Jehovah's Witness organization and the state of Norway. And on March 14th, the appellant court unanimously overturned a decision to revoke Jehovah's Witness tax-funded registration and state subsidies, declaring the administrative actions unconstitutional. Now we are here for round 4. So if you would like to read the past trials, appeals, please click to the right, which we'll take a, we're not going to look at them, but we're going to look at some of the other articles, some of the current newspaper articles. So what are the key legal arguments the Ministry of Children and Families is likely to raise in the Supreme Court? Jan says the state has to show that the initial decision from the county governor was well funded, that Jehovah's Witnesses were treated fairly, and that the decision is based on the law. And they also have to show that the denial of funding in itself is not a breach of freedom of religion. You see, no one's stopping Jehovah's Witnesses from carrying on their religion. They just lose out on the money. And that's what hurts them. Because this will set a precedent in Canada and other parts of the world. So what the Supreme Court needs to do is set boundaries of the law and how strict it is to be handled. And also burden of proof has to be decided. And that was the major difference between the initial court and the appeals court. And the appeals court set the burden of proof so high that it will be impossible for the state in most cases to use the law as it is written. So are there any procedural hurdles or precedents that could influence how the Supreme Court handles this case? Jan says, I don't really see any hurdles. I trust the Norwegian court system and the judges. They will handle this in the correct way. I predict that Watchtower will try to demand their picked pet experts and have them brought to court again. Remember last time? And I don't really see any scenario where that goes through. This will be the first time the law in question is handled by a Supreme Court. And bring major attention, not just for Jehovah's Witnesses, but for a lot of other religions out there in Norway and also Europe. He says, I'm not worried about Watchtower making any moves here. And the Supreme Court's next step is to review whether the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly their policy of excommunication, social distancing from ex-members, infringe upon individuals' rights to freely join or leave the religious community. You can't leave it without cutting your arm off. And as well as whether such practices violate children's rights. Well, of course they do. While legal arguments and doctrinal interpretations dominate discussions, the voices of the youngest members remain crucial in evaluating the ethical and moral dimensions of such cases. So that's the, I guess, the courthouse, Supreme Courthouse in Oslo. It's an old building. Colorful. If the Supreme Court upholds the appeal court ruling, what does that mean for the relationship between religious organizations and the Norwegian government? Jan says if the Supreme Court upholds a ruling from the appeals court in the way it was worded there, then the whole law is basically dead and useless and has to be rewritten. But even then, the case is open. And the only thing the courts do is send the 2022 decision back to be made again. And the state will then have several options on how to take it from there. Sounds like a big money grab. A big one. Lawyers love this stuff. They wouldn't have work. Judges love this stuff. They wouldn't have a job. So they have a whole pile of court systems. And I get it. You want to make sure it's going to be fair. So this case, you don't want it settled in the first court and have them walk away with their tail between their legs. But maybe this is going to go all the way to the European court. And it'll make some real big changes. But anyways, the funding applications for these years will need to be reconsidered. So if they gave the funding back to them, that's what they were bragging about, it'll have to be reconsidered if the Supreme Court is in the state's favor. And at present, the Jehovah's Witness organization remains unregistered and unfounded in Norway. And the decision of appeals court has never taken effect, and it will not take effect either since the Supreme Court has accepted the appeal. And if the Supreme Court sides with the state's argument, it will not reinstate any previous decisions. The situation will remain unchanged. The next question is a bold lie. What has surprised you most about the legal strategy of this case so far? Jan says, I've been surprised over and over again during these 4 years of procedure in courts. Kind of hard to rate them against each other. But I must say that what never stops to surprise me is the way that Jehovah's Witnesses sit next to me in court, listening to their lawyer deny basically stuff from JW Life, like the Elders Authority, that there's no rules and regulations and everyone is free to decide what to do. They sit there and listen to obvious lies, and they have no second thoughts about it, no shame. See, Jehovah's Witnesses are trained to go into court. The court's their enemy. Court is Satan. And I think these courts have to understand how they're painted in that organization. These courts, these lawyers, that they are Satan the devil. You guys are Satan, you courts out there. And you see, Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to lie when they're up against Satan in court. Theocratic warfare. And it is disgusting. This is what Jan's saying. It's disgusting. He sits next to these turkeys in court. He doesn't call them that here, but I do. Because they are. They sit there with no shame listening to these lies. So they could go home and say we won. Okay, the timeline, 2021 to 2022. The Ministry of Children and Families revokes the registration and subsidies. JW appeals it to the county governor. It's denied. March 4th, 2024. Oslo District Court upholds the state's decision. JWs lose. They're ordered to pay the cost. March 14th, 2025. Basically a year later. Borgating Court of Appeal unanimously overturns a lower court. JWs win. They're awarded $8.5 million NOK in costs. And August 26th, 2025, Supreme Court grants the state permission to appeal. The case is now moving to the 4th round at the highest court. Wow. And as the dates are posted and the appeal is ahead of us, Avoid will be reporting daily on this site and on the XJW subreddit. Just look for the price we pay. And some of the other articles that they pinned here was this one, Vartland. For all you JWs out there that think this is false news, we'll give you all the newspapers in Norway that says this is happening. and that your big win might not be a win. We'll see, but don't count your eggs before they're hatched. I don't know what they say. Anyways, the state has decided to appeal Jehovah's Witness verdict. So it's all over the news. Where's the next one? Online news. The state appeals the Jehovah's Witness case of the Supreme Court. It's all over the news. Yeah. This is big news. And then this is the government site, I guess. Jehovah's Witnesses, the validity of state's decision to deny subsidies and registration as a religious community. So it says the Supreme Court's Appeals Committee decided on August 26, 2025, that the appeal against the Borgadian Court's appeal judgment of March 14, 2025, will be heard in the Supreme Court. The case concerns Jehovah's Witnesses, the validity of the state's decision to deny subsidies and registration as a religious community, and whether the Jehovah's Witnesses violate the right to withdraw the rights of children. I bet you know how they're changing their rules so quick, with education, toasting. Every month they're changing from no beards to beards. Everyone's growing big beards. Women wearing slacks. Like the religion has done a 360. And what if, we haven't ran that wild card, what if between now and then they make some rule and they come up and say, we no longer shun children. You have to be 18 years or older to be shunned. They just don't shun them. So in other words, there's a situation, two elders, they don't do three. Three is a committee, right? You're to disfellowship someone. So they send two elders over to the home. They sit and talk with the family on what the situation is. They give everyone a hug. They have a cup of tea and they move forward. And that's how it should be, folks. That's how it should be. And the way David Splain's getting up there, like it didn't happen on education. You know how many lives have gotten ruined over the education thing? People are sitting there right now thinking my life is ruined. I could have went to university. And here I'm a janitor, hardly making it, or doing some job where your body just can't keep up as you get older. And then none of the Jehovah's Witnesses pay into any kind of a life insurance or old age thing because no one's going to get old. The new system's coming. What a farce. What a farce. The whole world has to know about this this filthy, destructive, violent, psychological, violent religion. Went a little bit off script there, but I don't think I wrecked anything. Okay, getting back to the scripts, local media, they're telling it all, and the Supreme Court's own website, it's showing it. And one last thought before we wrap this whole thing up. If Jehovah's Witnesses lose at Norway's Supreme Court, this case could be taken, and it will, to the European Court of Human Rights. Because Jehovah's Witnesses are going to go all the way. They went this far, they're not going to end down. We might have a chance. Let's go to the European Court. But you see, the risk there is, it matters. Because the ECHR sets a precedent across 46 countries. A ruling there could either hammer the practice of shunning as a violation of children's rights or protect it as a matter of religious freedom. Either way, the ripple effects go far beyond Norway. So that's a lottery that they're gambling on if they want to go that far. And they will. Because Jehovah is behind them. And because Jehovah has to make this right in front of the whole world. Because the whole world is the devil, the devil, the devil. You see, that's what goes through your mind. You get out of that religion. And that's what it's like in that religion. Everything's the devil, the devil. Oh, how's the devil getting you? It's bad. And that's why these changes have to happen. They have to happen. So Jehovah's Witnesses may be celebrating now, but as the scripture says in 1 Kings 20:11, let not him who puts on his armor boast like him who takes it off. In other words, don't count your victory before the battle is over. And this battle is far from over. I'll keep following this closely. I'll share updates as they happen. And if you found this helpful, please consider subscribing. Most people who watch aren't subscribed yet. And hitting that button really helps this channel out. It helps it to grow. So if we want to get these messages out, that's what can help us as creators. And I know no one wants a bunch of subscriptions, but it's how it works. So we can keep shining a light on these stories and keep exposing what's happening behind the scene. Well, folks, keep living your life with love. And remember, love does not shun a child because of men in New York, because they tell you to. You see, Jesus never, ever shunned a child. Good question for Jehovah's Witnesses to ask themselves. If you want to be Christ-like, why are you shunning children? Well, that's it. We'll see you guys on the next video. Bye for now.